The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched for miles under a dome of pure crystal. 847 different species had representatives sitting in the curved seats that spiraled up toward the ceiling. Some breathed oxygen like humans. Others needed special suits filled with methane or hydrogen. A few didn't even have physical bodies and appeared as glowing energy patterns floating in special containers. Ambassador Sarah Chun walked slowly down the main aisle toward the human section. She had been Earth's representative for 3 years now, ever since humanity joined the assembly. The other ambassadors nodded politely as she passed. Most of them still saw humans as the new kids who needed to learn how things worked in civilized space. The assembly had rules for everything: how to settle disputes between worlds, how to share trade routes, how to handle criminals who moved between star systems. But most importantly, they had the Harmony Accords. These were the basic laws that kept peace in the galaxy for over 2,000 years. The Harmony Accords said that all problems should be solved through talking first. If talking didn't work, then economic pressure was the next step. Trade sanctions, resource limits, things like that. If a species still caused trouble, the assembly might authorize limited military action. But this meant very specific targets. Military bases only. Command centers. Weapon factories. Never civilian populations. Never entire cities. Most species in the assembly had learned these lessons the hard way long ago. The Andromedans had fought a terrible war 3,000 years back that nearly destroyed their homeworld. They became the biggest supporters of peaceful solutions. The Centauri had seen their empire crumble when they tried to conquer their neighbors. Now they were philosophers who spent their time thinking about better ways to solve conflicts. Even the warrior species had adapted. The Korthax were 8-foot-tall reptiles with natural armor and claws that could cut through steel. But they had joined the assembly 500 years ago and now served as peacekeepers. They used their strength to stop fights, not start them. The Velhari were space nomads who used to raid merchant ships. Now, they were the galaxy's best mediators because they understood both sides of any conflict. Humanity was different, though. They had only been contacted 50 years ago when their first ships reached the edge of assembly space. The first contact had gone well. Humans seemed friendly and eager to learn. Their technology was impressive for such a young species. They had faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, an artificial intelligence that was almost as good as what the elder species used. But humans were also strange. They had unified their entire planet under one government in just a few decades after contact. Most species took centuries to achieve planetary unity. Humans did it through something they called the Earth Defense Pact. Every nation on Earth had agreed to work together when dealing with alien species. The assembly had been happy to welcome humanity. Their ships were well designed. Their diplomats were polite and intelligent. They followed all the rules and seemed to understand the importance of peaceful cooperation. But there were things about humans that made some of the elder species uncomfortable. Human history was full of wars. Not just border conflicts or resource disputes like most species had. Humans had fought massive wars that killed millions of their own people. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They had actually used nuclear weapons against each other, something that shocked even the warrior species. But humans insisted those days were behind them. They had joined the assembly because they wanted to be part of galactic civilization. They wanted to learn from species that had found better ways to handle conflicts. Earth's government had signed every treaty and agreement the assembly offered. They seemed genuine in their desire for peace. Most ambassadors found humans to be energetic but naive. Like children who were excited about everything but didn't really understand how dangerous the galaxy could be. The elder species felt protective of humanity. They wanted to guide these newcomers and helped them develop the wisdom that came from thousands of years of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian collective sat on the opposite side of the Great Hall from the humans. They were a proud warrior species that had joined the assembly 800 years ago. They looked somewhat like humans, but were taller and stronger. Their skin had a blue-gray color, and their eyes were completely black. They ruled over 40 worlds in one of the spiral arms of the galaxy. For the past few decades, the Zephyrians have been testing the limits of assembly patience. They expanded their territory beyond agreed boundaries. They sent military ships into neutral space. They made threats against smaller species that couldn't defend themselves. But they always stayed just barely within the rules. When the assembly sent formal complaints, the Zephyrians would apologize and pull back slightly. The elder species saw this as typical behavior for a warrior culture. The Zephyrians needed to flex their muscles occasionally. As long as they didn't actually attack anyone, the assembly could handle them through normal diplomatic channels. Economic sanctions, trade restrictions, formal censures. These tools had worked for hundreds of years. Ambassador Chun took her seat in the human section. Earth had only 12 colonies outside their home system, so humanity's section was much smaller than the elder species. But those 12 colonies were thriving. Humans were excellent colonists. They adapted quickly to different environments and worked together effectively to build new settlements. The session began with routine business. Trade dispute between two minor species. Environmental concerns on a shared world. Request for assembly aid after a natural disaster. Ambassador Chun listened politely, but found herself thinking about the reports she had received from Earth. Human intelligence services had been tracking Zephyrian military movements for months. The patterns were troubling. Large numbers of ships moving toward human space. Weapon stockpiles being moved to forward bases. Communications that suggested the Zephyrians were planning something significant. Earth had shared these concerns with the Assembly's Security Council. The response had been typical. More monitoring, diplomatic inquiries, formal requests for explanation. The elder species couldn't believe that the Zephyrians would actually break the Harmony Accords. Not after 800 years of peaceful membership, but Ambassador Chun remembered her briefings from Earth's military leaders. They had studied Zephyrian history carefully. Before joining the Assembly, the Zephyrians had conquered over 200 worlds. They had enslaved entire species. They had only joined the Assembly because a coalition of elder species had forced them to choose between membership and destruction. Session continued with discussions about minor issues that affected only a few species. Ambassador Chun participated when required, but spent most of her time observing the other representatives. She wondered if any of them truly understood what humans were capable of when pushed too far. The emergency session alarm echoed through the crystal dome of the assembly hall. Representatives from hundreds of species rushed to their seats, many still wearing sleeping clothes or environmental suits hastily thrown on. Ambassador Chun had been in her quarters reviewing trade reports when the call came. Now, she sat in the human section, watching the massive holographic display that showed the latest news from human space. 3 points of light flickered and died on the galactic map. New Geneva, Kepler's Hope, Terra Nova, all gone. The Andromedan speaker, a tall being with silver skin and no visible mouth, communicated through pure thought projection. Its mental voice reached every representative simultaneously. The Assembly recognizes the gravity of this situation. We've confirmed reports of the complete destruction of 3 human colony worlds by Zephyrian forces. The holographic display changed to show footage from the attacks. Zephyrian warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the 3 worlds. No warnings. No demands for surrender. Just immediate orbital bombardment with weapons designed to crack planetary crusts. New Geneva had been home to 800,000 people. It was humanity's agricultural center, with vast fields of engineered crops that fed half the human colonies. The Zephyrian ships had targeted the farms first, then the cities. Within 2 hours, the entire world was a burning wasteland. Kepler's hope was smaller, only 150,000 residents, but it was humanity's main research station. Scientists from across human space came there to study alien technologies and develop new innovations. The Zephyrians had used some kind of energy weapon that turned the planet's oceans to steam. The entire world was now covered in toxic clouds. Terra Nova had been the worst. It was humanity's newest colony, home to 1.8 million people, mostly families with young children. The Zephyrians had taken their time there. Instead of quick orbital strikes, they had landed ground forces. Reports from the last few survivors suggested the Zephyrians had hunted humans through the streets for sport before finishing the bombardment. Total casualties: 2.8 million human. Civilians dead in less than 6 hours. The Centauri representative stood slowly. It was an ancient being that looked like a walking tree with blue bark and glowing leaves. Its voice was like wind through branches. In 4,000 years of assembly history, we have never seen such a blatant violation of the harmony accords. The Zephyrians have crossed every line we have established. Agreement came from around the hall. The Korthax warrior peacekeepers hissed in anger. The energy beings flickered with emotional resonance. Even the normally calm Velhari mediators showed signs of distress. The Zephyrian representative stood in his section. He was a tall, blue-skinned humanoid wearing ceremonial armor. His black eyes showed no emotion as he spoke. The collective regrets the loss of life. However, these actions were necessary to secure Zephyrian territorial claims. The humans have been expanding too aggressively into space that rightfully belongs to our people. The hall erupted in angry voices. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in their outrage. The Andromedan speaker projected thoughts of calm, trying to restore order. Finally, the noise died down enough for official business to continue. The Zephyrian claims have no legal basis, announced the Regalian legal expert. A being that looked like a floating jellyfish surrounded by glowing data streams. Human colonies were established in neutral space with full assembly approval. The collective has committed acts of genocide without justification. The speaker turned toward the human section. Ambassador Chun, the assembly extends its deepest sympathy to Earth and all human colonies. We ask for your government's position on appropriate response measures. Chun stood slowly. She had received her instructions from Earth just an hour ago. The message had been brief and signed by the entire Earth Defense Council. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had governed the galaxy for millennia. Earth appreciates the Assembly's support during this difficult time, she said. Her voice was steady and professional. However, my government requires 72 hours to formulate our complete response to this attack. We will address the Assembly again at that time. The request surprised many representatives. Most species would have immediately demanded military assistance, or at least immediate economic sanctions against the Zephyrians. But the elder species found humanity's approach reasonable. Such a massive loss of life required careful consideration. The Andromedan speaker projected acceptance. The Assembly grants Earth's request for time to consider options. In the meantime, we will proceed with immediate measures. The next 3 hours were spent crafting the Assembly's official response. It followed the same pattern used for hundreds of similar conflicts over the centuries. Economic sanctions first. All trade with the Zephyrian collective would be suspended immediately. No Assembly species could sell them resources or technology. No Zephyrian ships would be allowed to dock at Assembly stations, Second came diplomatic isolation. The Zephyrian representative would be expelled from the assembly. Their worlds would lose access to galactic communication networks. They would be treated as a rogue state until they agreed to peace negotiations. Finally, there was the threat of limited military action. If the Zephyrians did not cease all hostile activities within 30 galactic standard cycles, the Assembly would authorize targeted strikes against Zephyrian military installations. Only military targets, of course. Civilian populations would be protected at all costs. The Centauri representative suggested additional measures. We should also demand reparations for the destroyed colonies. The Zephyrians must rebuild what they have destroyed and compensate the families of the dead. The Korthax peacekeeper leader agreed. Our ships will begin patrols of human space immediately. No Zephyrian vessel will threaten human civilians again. As the session continued, Ambassador Chun sat quietly in her seat. She received several updates from Earth through her secure communication link. The messages were brief and contained no details, just confirmation that Earth's response was being prepared. Many representatives approached Chun during breaks to offer personal condolences and support. The Andromedan speaker projected thoughts of shared grief. The Velhari mediator offered the services of their best negotiators. Even the energy beings shaped themselves into symbols of sympathy. Chun thanked them all politely. She did not mention the reports she was receiving from human intelligence services. Every human military unit in the galaxy had gone silent. No communications, no movement reports, no routine status updates. It was as if the entire human fleet had simply vanished. She also did not mention the recall orders that had been sent to every human civilian ship, research station, and diplomatic outpost. In the past 12 hours, humans had been quietly evacuating from every location except their core colonies. Families were being moved to secure bunkers. Non-essential personnel were being sent to Earth's most heavily defended systems. The Zephyrian representative remained in his seat throughout the session, showing no emotion as species after species condemned his people's actions. When asked for a response to the Assembly's sanctions, he simply repeated that the collective regretted the loss of life, but stood by their territorial claims. As the session ended, Chun received one final message from Earth. It contained just 6 words. Response will be delivered as promised. She gathered her materials and left the hall. Other representatives were already making plans for follow-up meetings, negotiations, and peace talks. The galaxy's elder species were confident that their measured approach would eventually bring the Zephyrians back into line. Chun knew better. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn what humans meant by appropriate response to the murder of 2.8 million civilians. The Assembly's carefully crafted diplomatic solutions were about to meet something they had never encountered before. Human military doctrine applied without restraint. The countdown had begun. Silence spread through human space like a disease. The first sign came 12 hours after the Assembly session ended. The research station at Alpha Proxima stopped transmitting its daily science reports. This had happened before during equipment failures, so the Assembly's monitoring systems logged it as a minor technical issue. 6 hours later, the human merchant ship New Horizon failed to check in at the Rigelian trade hub. The Rigelian Port Authority sent standard inquiry messages but received no response. The ship's tracking beacon showed it was still moving, but all communication channels were dead by the end of the first day. Every human presence in the galaxy had gone completely silent. Research stations, merchant ships, diplomatic outposts, even the small human embassy on the Centauri homeworld. No communications, no status reports, no routine data transmissions. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen remained at Assembly headquarters, but she provided no explanations. When other representatives asked about the communication blackout, She gave the same response every time. Earth is preparing its response as promised. The elder species found this concerning but understandable. Humanity had just suffered the worst attack in their short galactic history. Grief could make people withdraw from normal activities. The Assembly's psychological specialists had seen this before with other species that experienced traumatic losses. What they couldn't see was what was happening in human space. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the battleship Vengeance, watching the largest military gathering in human history. Through the massive viewports, he could see hundreds of ships moving in perfect formation. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and the massive dreadnoughts that Earth had been building in secret for the past 10 years. Humanity's military doctrine was based on a simple principle: overwhelming force applied with perfect coordination. While other species in the galaxy had developed elegant solutions for limited conflicts, humans had studied the art of total war. Every human military officer was required to study the great campaigns of their planet's history. Alexander's conquests, the Rumong legions, the Mongol invasions, Napoleon's lightning wars, the mechanized warfare of the 20th century. But this was larger than any military operation in human history. Over 3,000 warships had been recalled from across human space. Every planet in the Earth Defense Pact had contributed ships and crews. Even the civilian government had been temporarily suspended, with all authority transferred to the military command structure. The plan was elegant in its brutality. While the Assembly debated economic sanctions and diplomatic solutions, humanity had been mapping every Zephyrian installation in the galaxy. Not just the military bases and government centers that the Assembly would target. Everything. Civilian infrastructure, mining stations, agricultural worlds, even small research outposts. Human intelligence had identified the locations of every Zephyrian ship, every orbital platform, every populated world. More importantly, they had calculated the exact timing needed to hit everything simultaneously. No warnings, no chance for evacuation, no opportunity for surrender. Admiral Webb had commanded human fleets for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The ships moved in groups of 50 to 100, each group assigned to a specific Zephyrian system. They used advanced stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Technology that humanity had developed in secret, claiming it was for exploration and defense. The Assembly had no idea how advanced human military capabilities really were. During the 50 years since first contact, Earth had been carefully studying every piece of alien technology they could access. Human engineers were exceptionally good at reverse engineering and improving existing designs. What had taken the Zephyrians centuries to develop, humans had duplicated and enhanced in decades. But the most important difference was philosophy. The Zephyrians, like most galactic species, saw war as a tool for gaining specific objectives. You fought to control territory, or resources, or trade routes. You applied enough force to achieve your goals, then negotiated a settlement that left your enemies weakened but not destroyed. Humans had learned a different lesson from their bloody history. When someone threatened your family, your people, your way of life, you didn't just defeat them. You eliminated them completely. You made sure they could never threaten anyone again. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in judgment. They thought humans were like other assembly species. They expected economic pressure, diplomatic protests, maybe limited military strikes against a few bases. They had no idea that humanity's response to genocide was extinction. On the second day of silence, the Assembly Security Council held an emergency meeting. The Cortax peacekeepers reported that their patrols had found no signs of human military activity. This was puzzling because they expected to see defensive formations protecting the remaining human colonies. The Centauri representative shared philosophical concerns about humanity's withdrawal from galactic society. Isolation is not the path to healing, the ancient being advised. Earth must engage with the galactic community to process this trauma. The Andromedan speaker tried to project calming thoughts toward the human embassy, but received no mental response. This was strange because most species could at least sense Andromedan telepathic contact. Even if they couldn't communicate back, Ambassador Chun attended the meeting but offered no information beyond her standard response. She looked calm and professional, showing none of the emotional distress the assembly expected from someone whose people had just suffered such losses. What they didn't know was that Chun was receiving hourly updates from Earth's military command. She knew the exact position of every human fleet group. She knew which Zephyrian systems would be hit first and in what order. She knew that in less than 24 hours, an entire species would cease to exist. The irony was not lost on her. The assembly had spent the past 2 days crafting careful diplomatic solutions to prevent exactly this kind of total warfare. They had built their entire civilization on the principle that conflicts could be resolved through measured responses and proportional force. They were about to learn that humans had never agreed to those limitations. On the third day, several assembly species offered direct assistance to humanity. The Regelians provided economic aid packages for rebuilding the destroyed colonies. The Vilhari offered to mediate peace talks with the Zephyrians. The Andromedan Council voted to assign their most experienced trauma counselors to help human survivors. Chun thanked them all politely and promised that Earth would respond to their generous offers soon, 6 hours before the deadline. She received a final message from Earth. It contained detailed instructions for what she should do after humanity's response was delivered. There were protocols for handling the aftermath, prepared statements for the assembly, and procedures for managing the political consequences. The message ended with a personal note from Earth's Prime Minister. Ambassador, what we are about to do will change the galaxy forever. The elder species will never look at humanity the same way again. Some will fear us. Others will respect us. But none will ever again mistake kindness for weakness. Make sure they understand that we did not choose this path. The Zephyrians chose it when they murdered our people. Chun deleted the message and prepared for the longest day of her diplomatic career. In a few hours, the assembly would reconvene to hear Earth's response to the Zephyrian attack. They expected a request for military assistance, or perhaps a proposal for peace negotiations. Instead, they would witness the birth of a new kind of warfare in galactic civilization, a type of conflict that the Harmony Accords had been specifically designed to prevent. Total war conducted with industrial efficiency and absolute purpose. The countdown reached 0. Across the galaxy, human fleet groups dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization. The response had begun. The first sign of humanity's response came from the Zephyrian homeworld. At exactly 1400 Galactic Standard Time, 300 human warships appeared in orbit around Zephyr Prime. No advance warning, no diplomatic communications, no demands for surrender. They simply materialized from faster-than-light travel in perfect attack formation and began firing immediately. The Zephyrian orbital defense stations lasted 47 minutes. They had been designed to repel traditional galactic warfare, where attackers would arrive in small groups and engage in careful tactical battles. No one had prepared for hundreds of ships arriving simultaneously and focusing all their firepower on destroying everything in orbit. But the humans didn't stop after eliminating the military targets. They continued bombarding the planet below. Similar scenes played out in every Zephyrian system across the galaxy. Human fleets appeared without warning in perfect coordination. Military bases, orbital platforms, and space stations were destroyed within the first hour. Then the ships turned their weapons on the planets themselves. The assembly's monitoring stations picked up fragments of desperate communications from Zephyrian forces. Ship commanders calling for help that would never come. Planetary governors begging for mercy that would never be granted. Civilian populations screaming as their cities burned. Ambassador Chun walked calmly into the assembly hall as emergency alarms echoed through the crystal dome. Representatives from hundreds of species were arriving in panic, many still receiving live reports from their ships in Zephyrian space. The great holographic display showed the galaxy-wide scope of humanity's attack. 47 Zephyrian systems under simultaneous assault. Over 3,000 human warships engaged in coordinated bombardment. No human casualties reported because the Zephyrians never had a chance to fight back. The Andromedan speaker projected thoughts of horror and disbelief. Ambassador Chun, what is Earth doing? This level of response violates every principle of civilized warfare. Chun took her place at the human podium. Her voice was calm and professional as she addressed the assembly. Earth is applying the Zephyrian doctrine of civilian targeting. The collective demonstrated that women, children, and non-combatants are legitimate military objectives. We are simply following their example. The Centauri representative stood with shaking branches. This is genocide. You cannot destroy entire populations because of the actions of their military. The Zephyrians killed 2.8 million human civilians, Chun replied. They showed no mercy to our children. They hunted families through the streets for entertainment. Earth sees no reason to show mercy to theirs. On the display, reports continued streaming in from across Zephyrian space. The humans weren't just attacking military and government targets. They were systematically destroying all infrastructure capable of supporting civilization. Power plants, communication networks, transportation hubs, agricultural facilities, water treatment centers. The Korthax peacekeeper commander hissed in anger. This goes beyond any reasonable response. You must order your ships to cease this attack. Chun's expression didn't change. Earth's military forces are operating under direct orders from our highest authorities. The operation will continue until completion. Completion? The Rigelian legal expert's data streams flickered with distress. What do you mean by completion? Chun looked directly at the Zephyrian representative, who sat in stunned silence as his entire civilization died around him. The complete elimination of the Zephyrian threat to human civilians. We will ensure they can never again murder innocents. The hall erupted in shocked voices. Species that had maintained galactic peace for millennia couldn't comprehend what they were witnessing. The humans weren't just winning a war. They were committing species-level extermination. You must stop this. The Vilharan mediator's normally calm voice cracked with emotion. There has to be a peaceful solution. The Zephyrians are trying to surrender. Are they? Chun activated her personal communication system and broadcast on all galactic frequencies. The voice that filled the hall was cold and mechanical. This is Admiral Webb of the Earth, Defense Fleet. Any Zephyrian vessel attempting to surrender will be destroyed. Any Zephyrian installation broadcasting for mercy will be eliminated. This operation will continue until no Zephyrian military capability remains. The Zephyrian representative finally found his voice. Please, my people are dying. We surrender. We'll pay any reparation, accept any terms. Chun turned to face him directly. Your people had the opportunity to surrender before they murdered 2.8 million humans. That opportunity has expired. The assembly watched in horror as the reports continued. Human fleets were now targeting Zephyrian civilian infrastructure on every world. They weren't killing civilians directly, but they were destroying everything needed to support life on 47 planets. Power grids, water systems, food production, medical facilities. The Andromedan speaker projected desperate thoughts. This is not justice. This is revenge taken too far. Justice? Chun's voice remained perfectly controlled. Justice would be putting the Zephyrian military leadership on trial. Justice would be reparations and monitoring to prevent future attacks. What you are witnessing is not justice. This is a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Whispered the Centauri representative. Of what happens to any species that chooses to target human civilians. Chun gestured to the holographic display, where Zephyrian worlds were going dark one by one. For 50 years, humanity has followed assembly protocols. We've resolved disputes through negotiation. We've limited our military responses to proportional force. We've been the model members you wanted us to be. She paused, letting her words sink in. But the Harmony Accords contain an assumption that all species share certain basic principles. That civilian populations are protected. That children are not military targets. That genocide is unacceptable. The display showed Zephyr Prime burning. 12 billion people lived on that world. And human ships were systematically destroying every piece of infrastructure that kept them alive. The Zephyrians rejected those principles when they murdered our colonies. So Earth has decided to demonstrate the consequences of that choice. Hours passed as the assembly watched helplessly. Human fleets continued their methodical destruction of Zephyrian civilization. No ship was spared. No base was left functioning. No world remained habitable. The other galactic powers tried everything they could think of. The Andromedan Council offered to negotiate on behalf of the Zephyrians. The Centauri proposed immediate peace talks with any terms humanity demanded. The Korthax peacekeepers threatened to intervene militarily to stop the slaughter. Chun responded to each offer with the same calm professionalism. Earth appreciates the Assembly's concern. However, this operation will continue to completion as planned. How can you watch this and feel nothing? The energy beings flickered with emotional distress. Billions are dying. I feel exactly what the Zephyrian representative felt when he watched our colonies burn, Chun replied. Nothing. Because they are not my people. By the 18th hour, it was over. Every Zephyrian military installation had been destroyed. Every orbital facility was debris. Every planet was uninhabitable. The species that had ruled 47 star systems for 8 centuries had been reduced to scattered refugee ships fleeing into empty space. Admiral Webb's final transmission was broadcast to the entire galaxy. Zephyrian military capability has been eliminated. All human fleets are returning to defensive positions. This concludes Earth's response to the attack on our civilian populations. The assembly hall fell silent. Representatives from hundreds of species stared at the display, showing where the Zephyrian collective used to exist. 12 billion people dead or dying. An entire civilization erased in less than a day. Chun collected her materials and prepared to leave the podium. But she stopped and addressed the assembly one final time. Earth wishes to clarify our position for all species present. Any government that deliberately targets human civilians forfeits its right to exist. This is not a threat or a negotiating position. It is simply our policy. We hope this demonstration has made our position clear to anyone considering similar actions in the future. She walked out of the hall, leaving behind an assembly that would never be the same. The galaxy's carefully constructed civilization, built on principles of proportional response and diplomatic solutions, had just been shattered by a species that believed in absolute consequences. In 18 hours, humanity had taught the galaxy a new kind of fear. The silence in the assembly hall stretched for 17 minutes. 846 species sat in their seats, staring at the holographic display that now showed empty space where the Zephyrian collective once ruled 47 star systems. For the first time in galactic recorded history, An entire major civilization had been completely erased in a single day. The Andromedan speaker finally broke the silence with projected thoughts that reached every mind in the hall. The mental voice carried an emotion that most representatives had never felt from their species before: fear. The assembly will now discuss the implications of recent events. But no one spoke. The elder species that had governed galactic civilization for millennia found themselves speechless. How do you discuss something that shattered every assumption about how civilized beings conduct warfare? The Centauri representative was the first to find words. Its ancient voice shook like wind through dying leaves. In 4,000 years of galactic history, we have never witnessed anything like this. The humans have violated every principle that holds our civilization together. Have they? The question came from an unexpected source: the Korthax Peacekeeper Commander. The 8-foot reptilian warrior rarely spoke during assembly sessions, preferring action to debate. But now its voice carried a thoughtfulness that surprised everyone. The Harmony Accords exist to prevent exactly what the Zephyrians did, the Korthax continued. They murdered civilians. They targeted children. They committed genocide for territorial gain. By our own laws, they forfeited their membership in civilized society. The Rigelian legal experts' data streams flickered rapidly as it processed thousands of legal precedents. The legal framework is complex. While the Zephyrian actions were clearly criminal, the human response exceeded all established parameters for justified retaliation. Justified? The energy beings pulsed with agitation. How can the extinction of 12 billion people ever be justified? Ambassador Chen had returned to her seat but remained silent. She had said everything Earth needed to say. Now, the galaxy had to process what they had witnessed and decide how to move forward. The debate that followed revealed how unprepared the assembly was for dealing with humanity's approach to warfare. For 2,000 years, galactic conflicts had followed predictable patterns. Limited objectives, proportional responses, negotiated settlements that left all parties weakened but intact. Humanity had introduced a concept that terrified the elder species: total war as a tool of policy. Not war to achieve specific goals, but war to completely eliminate threats. The Velahari mediator tried to find common ground. Surely there must be some way to address Earth's security concerns without resorting to genocide. We understand their anger, but this level of response threatens the stability of our entire civilization. Chun finally spoke. Earth's security concerns have been addressed. The Zephyrian threat to human civilians no longer exists. We have no quarrel with any other species as long as they respect the lives of innocent humans. But the precedent you've set. The Centauri representative's branches rustled with distress. If every species responds to attacks with total annihilation, our galaxy will become a wasteland of extinct civilizations. Only if species choose to target civilians, Chun replied calmly. The Korthax have been warriors for millennia, but they follow the rules of honorable combat. They attack military targets, not schools and hospitals. Earth has no conflict with them. The Korthax commander nodded slowly. The humans fight like we did before we learned wisdom. But they are not wrong. The Zephyrians chose to break the most sacred rule of warfare. They faced the consequences of that choice. As days passed, the full scope of the change became clear. Refugee ships from the former Zephyrian space carried survivors to assembly worlds, but there were so few of them. Most of the collective's population had lived on planets that were now uninhabitable. The scattered survivors told stories of watching their entire civilization die in a single day, but the psychological impact went far beyond the immediate destruction. Every species in the galaxy now had to recalculate their understanding of humanity. The friendly newcomers who had followed every rule and signed Every treaty had revealed themselves capable of industrial-scale extinction. Trade patterns shifted almost immediately. Species that had maintained military alliances against human expansion suddenly found those alliances meaningless. What was the point of military planning when humans could eliminate entire civilizations faster than traditional fleets could even mobilize? The warrior species were the first to adapt. The Korthax peacekeepers issued new protocols that specifically protected human civilians during any future conflicts. Their military academies began studying human tactical doctrines, trying to understand how such devastating coordination was possible. The Mandalorian mercenary guilds, who hired their services to the highest bidder, quietly removed all contracts involving human targets. Professional soldiers understood the mathematics of warfare better than politicians. There was no amount of payment worth facing an enemy that responded to casualties by eliminating entire species. But it was the philosopher species that struggled most with the new reality. The Centauri had built their entire civilization around the belief that wisdom could solve any conflict. The idea that some problems required complete destruction of one's enemies challenged everything they had believed for thousands of years. The Andromedan Council spent weeks in deep telepathic meditation, trying to understand how a species could simultaneously show such kindness in daily interactions and such ruthlessness in warfare. Their conclusion disturbed them. Humans compartmentalized violence in ways that other species couldn't comprehend. During normal times, humans were genuinely peaceful. They preferred negotiation, followed diplomatic protocols, and showed remarkable empathy for other species. But when they perceived existential threats, they became something else entirely. Something that could watch billions die with the same emotional detachment that other species reserve for swatting insects. 3 months after the Zephyrian extinction, the Assembly faced its first major test of the new reality. A border dispute between two minor species had escalated to the point where one side was threatening to target civilian populations. Before humanity's demonstration, this would have been handled through the usual diplomatic channels. Now, the Assembly's response was swift and absolute. Both species were informed that any attack on civilians would result in immediate military intervention, not by the Assembly's traditional peacekeeping forces, but by humanity itself. The dispute was resolved within hours. Ambassador Chun found herself in an unprecedented position. Other species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence now sought Earth's opinion on virtually every decision, not because they wanted human guidance, but because they needed to ensure their actions wouldn't trigger another extinction event. The informal conversations were the most revealing. In private meetings, representatives from dozens of species asked the same questions. What were humanity's real territorial ambitions? Which actions might be interpreted as threats to human civilians? How could other species avoid becoming the next Zephyrian collective? Chun's answers were always the same. Earth had no interest in galactic conquest. They wanted to build colonies, conduct trade, and contribute to scientific advancement. But they would eliminate any species that chose to murder human families. The simplicity of the position was what made it so frightening to the elder species. Most galactic powers had complex foreign policies with dozens of different considerations. Humanity's policy could be summarized in a single sentence: leave our people alone or cease to exist. 6 months after the extinction, the Assembly passed a historic resolution. For the first time in galactic history, they voted unanimously on a military matter. Human colonies were designated as protected territories under the highest classification of Assembly law, not because the Assembly particularly loved humanity, but because no one wanted to find out if humans had any limits to their definition of appropriate response. The Andromedan, the speaker, projected the thoughts that everyone was feeling but afraid to express. We are no longer the same galaxy we were before. The humans have shown us something about ourselves that we didn't want to see. We built our civilization on the assumption that all intelligent species would eventually choose wisdom over violence. We were wrong. The final vote was 846-0 in favor of the resolution. The one empty seat had belonged to the Zephyrian representative. Ambassador Chun stood to address the assembly one last time before the vote was officially recorded. Her words were broadcast to every world in galactic civilization. Earth is grateful for the Assembly's recognition of our territorial rights. We look forward to continuing our peaceful participation in galactic civilization. We hope that the recent demonstration of consequences for civilian targeting will ensure that no other species makes the same mistake as the Zephyrian collective. She paused, looking around the hall at representatives who had once seen humans as naive children needing guidance. The galaxy is large enough for all of us to coexist peacefully. Earth simply asks that everyone remember that human civilians are not valid military targets. As long as that principle is respected,